To every light there is a shadow, and to every day there is a night. And that seems to be the basis of William Afton and Henry Emily. William is a monster who murders children and adults, abuses his children, and is an egotistical megalomaniac with a god complex. In contrast, Henry Emily is a sweet man and a good father who loved his family and kids and is willing to sacrifice everything for the greater good. Except while FNAF's storyline wants you to think that with how frequently they frame him as a hero, that's not quite the truth. In fact, Henry is the opposite of that. He is a man who was hurt long ago but shows so much apathy towards everyone else, only caring about his own loss that he even treats the person he lost more like an object than a person, abandoned his family, gave up his responsibility, and then comes in long after the fact just to alleviate his own guilt. He says as much. Perhaps once I lay it all out for you, you will at least see where I'm coming from. But before we get into that, I need to make one thing abundantly clear. I've had an essay a long time ago about how Henry was flawed, and the response I got were defensive because of Henry's depression, saying he's mentally ill and thus doesn't know what he's doing and can't be held accountable for any of his actions. Even though Henry is shown to have been clear-headed in many of the decisions I'll go over. But that doesn't matter anyway, because I am not critiquing the character and morality of a man, a human being. I am critiquing the narrative dissonance and framing of this character in contrast to others. It's less Henry's actions alone, and more how this story shows exception to Henry's actions. Let's start with Henry's history in the games. We know nothing about Henry until Pizzeria Simulator, where he reveals his story in a big plot dump at the end. He was a business partner of William's. William killed his daughter, who became the puppet, and then Henry disappeared for numerous years before coming back and rigging this elaborate trap to burn Afton for the second time. He could have been behind the Fazbear Frights fire, but the fact that he doesn't mention it in his info dump makes me a little doubtful of that. Initially, I was going to hold the fact that the fire didn't work against Henry, considering how the first burning didn't work and Security Breach showed this one didn't work either. But I will give him credit for attempting to find a solution. There are major flaws in his solution, though, so I will go into those later, but the idea to burn William and the dangerous animatronics is not necessarily a bad one. Now let's go into Henry in the books. Henry was again the business partner to William. William killed his daughter. Henry was suspected for kidnapping the missing children as well, but wasn't involved with that. He was so trapped in grief that his wife left him with his son, and he, years later, a confusing amount of years later, I don't know exactly, decided to build a robot to replace Charlie. He cried into a doll, and that somehow brought the robot to life, and yes, I still think that that's strange. And after a few years of raising Charlie, Henry's grief was too great, and he built a robot to kill himself, leaving Charlie to be raised by her strict aunt and to not know the truth about her birth until years later, after William properly took advantage of her. I find it funny that Henry still took Charlie back to the pizzeria in her childhood, or that, from the implications, Henry might have opened a second pizzeria. That one is a little more confusing. I'll deal with that some other day. I'm not going to fault Henry for committing suicide, obviously, but I find the way he went about creating and then leaving Charlie without an adequate backup plan to be rather negligent of him, especially since in the games, Henry also expresses an interest in taking his own life, but refuses to do so until he fixes what he can, and especially since he decided to wait long enough to build a robot to do it. But that is not even the beginning of Henry's issues with Charlie, his beloved daughter, his little angel, who in both games and books is an object of grief more than a person to him. In the books, we get Charlie talking fondly about her father in at least one of them, but then we also get scenes where he callously guts a doll in front of her as she begs him to stop. He doesn't bat an eye. He doesn't show any concern or empathy. He doesn't even acknowledge that she's crying profusely on the floor. Between this and things such as killing himself with his daughter alone in the house to be the one to find the body, kind of feels like Henry didn't give much regard to Charlie. repeatedly it's shown that he just doesn't really seem to care if what he does has an effect on her. And again, it wasn't like the suicide was a spur of the moment because he built a robot to do it. So he had plenty of time to have her somewhere else when he did it. Henry doesn't seem to treat Charlie like a person, even though he is at least somewhat under the belief that he was able to bring her to life. So you can't use the narrative's decision to treat Charlie like an object later on in the books as the same reason that Henry treats her like an object. He just shows a side of him that could care less. However, his behavior towards Charlie's in the game is sizably much worse. Henry is aware that Charlie is possessing the puppet, and yet he lets her roam free for years. He doesn't try to help her, or from what we know, approach her. In Ultimate Custom Night, the puppet claims it's not like the others. It's aware and able to recognize who is who. So it is possible that Henry might have been able to approach it, but he didn't try. Instead, he did something horrific. Henry created Lefty. Lefty is a walking bear trap. It is made to lure the puppet in, trap it inside, and then continuously shock it to keep it in a dormant state. Make no mistake, the soother says that a steady shock is to sedate the puppet, and we know what controlled shocks do, what they're like, what the animatronics feel when they get them. He traps his daughter into a suit that's constantly shocking her, sets her loose amongst her murderer and his monsters, and then he sets her on fire. It seems cruel, and once again, entirely uncaring. This is the person Henry was willing to never move on from losing, abandoning his own family to his grief, and huddling up for years alone. And yet he rigs up such a callous trap and forces her to burn alongside her murderer, when he could have trapped her and then dealt with her elsewhere. Because he's decided he's finally ready to go, and he's taking everybody with him. And since we're discussing family, let's discuss his wife and son. I know the son wasn't confirmed in the games, but I find it weird that he would have had a son in the books and just not in the games. To which he pretty much abandons him too. Yes, the wife took Sammy and left, but Henry showed no interest in pursuing his son. He never reached out to him. He never cared to keep a connection. And it's not that his wife kept him apart, because one of her gripes, as specified in the graphic novel, and I don't remember if it was in the actual novel, so this might be a write-in, was that Henry was never there for their son. As much as grief hurts, and I can't imagine losing a child, totally abandoning your other child is turning your back on them. I get it, Charlie was his favorite, the book specifies as much, but it's not really fair for all these years to cut off from your other child entirely. And now we've got something that's a little more speculatory, but Henry's treatment of Michael Afton. We don't know about the relationship of Henry and Michael Afton at all, except for one thing. When I wrote my essay, it hinged on this moment, but I had people getting really upset when I brought this up, so I'm going to bring it up again, and hope not many people get as upset because I'm a little more clear with what I'm trying to say. Henry made this pizzeria, and he made it with a trap in place to burn everyone inside. It is likely that he knew Michael was coming in to work there. Him and Michael talking beforehand about this does not seem to be the case from Henry's last statement. He makes a comment about how there was supposed to be an escape for Michael, but he doesn't think that's what Michael wants. So Michael's going to burn with all of them. And the thing that I think I had problems getting across before is, why? Well, two things. One is, there might have still been an escape route. Well, that's great, but Henry apparently didn't tell Mike where it was. Two, Michael wanted to burn. That, I kind of feel like that, considering the fact that Henry and Michael didn't talk about it beforehand, the fact that Henry just assumed Michael was ready to let go is kind of a big assumption to make on someone. That's kind of not the choice you give to someone, because we know Michael was having a hard time after Sister Location, but maybe he doesn't want this to be the end. I mean, probably he does, but Henry doesn't know that. Henry's just putting his own grief on Michael and dragging him down with him. And here's the other part. He kind of implies that he doesn't exactly know who's in there. He's pretty sure it's Michael Afton. He might really know, but there's no concrete information that he really knows who's in there. So what if this is just some stranger off the street who ended up taking the job under a fake name? Got in there, got stuck in this fire capsule, and then Henry's like, well, there was going to be an escape plan, but I think you deserve to be here too, champ. Okay, but that aside, all of this is just Henry not showing much empathy towards other people. Sure, he hurt his family and possibly Michael, but this happens, and characters do this sort of thing all the time. Except there's one fatal flaw that Henry has absolutely no excuse for. And it's one flaw that makes it harder to feel sympathy towards his situation. In Alice Madness Returns, there is a moment where Alice, the main protagonist, is confronted by the caterpillar. Alice is a person who has suffered through grave tragedies and loss, who is suffering from severe mental illness because of it. The caterpillar is both a hallucination and an embodiment of herself speaking to her. Alice asks why she is being punished when she herself is a victim. I know I am guilty of something, but punishment never suits the victims of the crime. To which the caterpillar says this: abuse is a crime the strong visit on the weak. And you're right, abusers are insufficiently punished for the damage they do. Those who witness abuse without seeking retribution for the harm pay a penalty. Your own pain mitigates your failure to act earlier, but you may not yet have paid enough for witnessing the pain of others. To clarify what he means, here's a more condensed version. Abusers do abuse the weak, and they aren't punished enough for what they do. But those who see this abuse and don't do anything about it are just as responsible. You might have been hurting too much to act earlier, but your continued inaction makes you responsible. And this line always reminds me of Henry Emily. Because whether it be the games or the books, Henry stood aside for years and let the pain of Freddy's bleed out. He says so himself. But confessing to your crimes does not forgive you of them. Countless parents had to watch their children go missing and not know if they were dead or not. Countless adult employees died and left behind their families. Countless children died horrible, suffering deaths. And some of them ended up trapped in machines that people like William Afton and companies like Fazbear Entertainment took advantage of. All the while, Henry didn't do anything. Well, the cops couldn't prove William. This is Henry. He's a man with nothing to lose who built a fake pizzeria just to finally kill Afton. He could have come up with something, but in both scenarios, he doesn't. He waits until too many lives are ruined, until Afton is too out of control to be stopped. And when he does finally act, he kills off Michael and the puppet with him, the only two people who were left even trying to stop Afton, and trying for a lot longer than Henry did. There's this sort of framing that Michael's trying to find redemption and make up for his many mistakes, but he was actually trying to stop William while Henry wasted years doing nothing. And it's not like Henry was trying to raise his son to the point where he could survive without him. He had no contact with him. Henry's pain is often framed by the books and games as more severe than the others. In the Fourth Closet, the wording seems to frequently get weird, talking about how much Henry suffered and how much he loved Charlie, as though a shield to reflect him from criticism. Henry is portrayed as the only parent who is still upset about their missing child, framing it like everyone's got over and forgot about Freddy's except for him. Henry's pain is greater than Charlie's. And whenever Charlie expresses confusion or emotional or mental anguish at her situation, everyone else kind of just sort of shrugs it off, really, or dismisses it, or in the case of Baby, outright lambasts Charlie for asking questions like she didn't know. But whenever Henry's pain is brought up, it's dealt with a gentle hand. Other people are shown to suffer more than Henry, and yet Henry is the only one who gets the last laugh on William. Henry is the one who gets the final say. So, what is Henry? Well, he's not a monster. But he's not a great person either, and he's definitely not the perfect father figure that one might envision. He turned his own daughter into a pawn to punish Afton. He showed very little empathy towards others, and he allowed himself to be so consumed with his grief that he hurt others and let others be hurt around him. That does not make Henry awful, but the fact that Henry never had a moment to make up for this, because I find it hard to consider the fire as that moment of redemption, this is kind of where we leave him. This moment is the moment we will remember him for, and it wasn't one of his best.